welcome to All Things MSP Office Hours. Now today I have a special guest, and this is actually because it's so much great content. We're actually going to split it up into two, so you'll get one this week and you'll get the next one the week after. So, running an MSP, and I've experienced this, and I know a lot of MSPs that I talk to experience this, managing people is hard. So what I've done is I've gone out and I've, talked to a lot of people about this, and I don't think there's any better person to talk about how managing people can be fixed with processes and documentation than Alan Edwards from Eureka Process. So today, Alan's going to take us through some of the things that he teaches, some of the things that's in his book about processes and how to build those. And he's going to take us through kind of a sneak peek and some educational content. You will walk away with some ideas about how to implement things in your business that will move it forward and make managing people just that much easier. So welcome, Alan. How are you doing today?
Doing great, Eric. Thanks for having me on. Always love talking to your folks.
Of course. Well, and your content is so important because a lot of us were technicians first, right? Before we became business owners. And so building these business processes and documenting these business processes can be daunting. But I think, because I've read your book, right? And we've had several conversations about this. The way you've put it together makes more sense. And it also simplifies it to a point where it doesn't make it as daunting as some of those other, I guess, bigger frameworks for trying to do something like this. So really, I'm just going to kind of hand this over to you. I know we've got some slides to share. Let me go ahead and pull up our presentation mode. There we go. And I'll just let you start away.
I'm curious if our audience heard the word slides and we heard a collective eye roll.
Oh, yeah, I probably shouldn't have done that, right? But we're going to... Obviously, this content, because All Things MSP Office Hours is supposed to be educational, it's going to contain slides. You can go back and watch the live stream of Alan and I, when we just talked about this stuff without using slides. And I'm sure that Alan will be on the live stream or the podcast at some point in the future. So, if you're looking for some fun content with Alan and I, look for one of those coming up in the future. But this one today is about teaching some things about how to create a culture of process. So Alan, it's all you.
All right. Sounds great. Thanks again. I do feel like the purpose of slides is to help illustrate and even entertain. My slide deck today was based on content I've been working in for a long time, but it has not been approved by marketing, so you don't see our branding on it. I tried to pick some All Things MSP colors to go with it. So bear with me if anything's not pretty, but I hope it's cool and you learn something from it, because that's the goal. All right, so I like to describe the problem that we're all facing, as Eric mentioned, people management, as a terrible disease called LBS, leaky bucket syndrome. It's very similar to IBS, because that's what it causes. And the basic concept is as your business grows, you teach your people what you know. You hand them your bucket of knowledge. And over time, and even for good reasons, this person begins to vary from the information you gave them. They learn new things or trying new things. They forgot a few things. You forgot to teach them a few things. And it's okay, right? They're still pretty smart. They're still helping you out and you're leveraging their time. That's great. But over time, they begin to hand this knowledge to others as you continue to grow. And the problem gets worse and worse. And so you end up with this sad red shirt guy who's probably going to die on an episode of Star Trek. And believe it or not, he's not the only one disappointed. So are you, so are your clients, and so are your colleagues. And that's the problem that I want to fix. And it may be no surprise that I feel like some of the solutions for that are processes, but I want to acknowledge really quick the other few areas that will help. KPIs. To me, that is also a type of process. It sets clear expectations in what we're measuring and what good looks like. And it's always in front of them. So KPIs are a great one. Your onboarding program, also related to process, is a key ingredient to filling that bucket in the first place. And then the coaching system which is actually going to be more of our content for part 2 of this series, which I'm looking forward to next week. And we'll teach that then. But today we're going to focus on the process piece, and we're going to fix that red shirt guy right up. Sound good?
Sounds good to me, except, I really feel bad for that red shirt guy because, red shirt, Star Trek, I got the reference. Yeah, never a good thing.
We're going to fix them up, though. First, some key definitions, because we used words like process all the time, and I found myself, when I was writing the book, I had to go back and define for myself what these words meant because I was getting confused. So first, an easy one, process, a series of actions that lead to a particular result, and for your business, a particularly positive result. Pretty close to dictionary definition there. But I made my own definition for what documentation means. It's a written form in an accessible place of the decision you have made. So when you document a process, you have agreed in writing that this is the decision we have made to do it this way. I will use documentation and process synonymously as the same thing. And I want to help you guys have a culture of process. But what is culture? It's this ethereal word, right? And I was actually quite relieved that I looked it up to get a more clear understanding of that word. It's just a widely accepted way of doing something of a particular group of people. A particular group, your company, your team. And widely accepted is, what do they tend to always do? You probably have a culture of things they tend to do already, even if it's not in writing. But we can make a great culture by being intentional, just as we can get a not so good culture unintentionally. So step 1 is know thyself. Document your documentation. So we want to build the blueprint to your documentation system that I call the process. And yes, you're going to chuckle at that word, but it's far better than the procedure that when I first wrote that in 2005. AmbiPro had no idea what to do with that.
Yeah, I can imagine how that would be a little bit, I'm just thinking that through.
Lived it. Learned the hard way. Got the t-shirt. The process is your blueprint to your documentation system. We need to agree on all the things about documentation before we just start doing it. And this might seem like an asinine step. And maybe you're right. I don't know. But I find that you can get this step done in just an hour or two and solve all sorts of future problems. So here's what you should be in your process and how I'm going to recommend you answer those 6 questions. 1, every process should start with why, right? And my answer is, this is the blueprint for a documentation system. Draw out the analogy. How do the carpenters and the plumbers work together without understanding how it all connects and how it all works? I will share a template with you, Eric, to share with the rest of your audience, and that template will allow you to copy and paste all of these direct answers in our language, and you fill in the blank and make your own process. Of course, feel free to change it for yourself, but I wanted to get you a head start. It doesn't have to be hard. Who? You should have a documentation czar. You can call them whatever you like. I think czar is cute. It's not overused. It's somebody who's responsible for your documentation system. This does not necessarily mean technically responsible. Oh, they're the ones who got our instance running or maintains that server. It doesn't mean they have to do all the documentation. What it does mean is they're responsible for making sure that the stuff that's in the documentation system follows the rules of the documentation system. So basically, we write this process, and your documentation czar makes sure it's living up to expectations there. When? Well, there's pretty much 2 answers on the spectrum here. I like everyone documenting everything all the time. Then again, most of my prospects are in those first 3 levels of operational maturity, seedling, sapling, or new growth. They're really trying to build their documentation library, and modern IT documentation systems, I'll name some, IT Glue, Hoodoo, Confluence, and others, have pretty good revision tracking and rollback systems. So why not encourage them to edit instead of putting up barriers to creating documentation? Now, there is certainly a place where as you grow, You may want to put more change management processes in place, and that does begin to make sense. Just don't be too heavy-handed on that. For example, in the middle, many people shift internal policies to being permission only to edit. Send them a change request, pros and cons, rollback plan, and get that submitted and out there. How do we document? I listed here an example. This happens to be some IT glue screenshots. You can do this in any system, by the way, even SharePoint and Word, of how do we generally do our documentation and processes. Some tips here. I like to use slang because we tend to use slang internally. That means we're going to be searching for slang in our systems. Take advantage of that. But I also like to put the long form. Since we use IT Glue, we will use their native structure for formatting. When I was using SharePoint for a project, I would create a Word template that said, hey, use type 12 font. Stuff like that. Be consistent. And the reason for consistency isn't just being anal retentive as I am sometimes. It's because it makes it easier and faster to reference. It also makes there to be no murkiness about what you're writing, which speeds up the process. Also, a great tip at the very bottom one there. Always refer to roles and not names. Even naming your documentations are. Is that responsibility belong to the service manager? Does it belong to the owner? Does it belong to the president? Does it belong to the VCIO? What is the role? Because as those names change over time, I'd like this document to survive that. Oh, here's the hard part, the what. I have a gazillion slides I could fill out what. So here's some important tips before I get to what's on the slide deck there. Internal processes are a different what than technical SOPs. And that can be a different what than client-facing documents. So you might have different advice on how to do those. One thing that I've actually recently done, this is not in the book, this is not even in my template, is what's on the screen and why it shows that for my slides today. I've started pre-pending different types of documentation with the words you see on the screen. The common example I get asked is, what's the difference in a train document and an SOP? A train is showing somebody how to understand a product, how to use the product in general terms, like ConnectWise training, or training to manage a Facebook group. Just understand things about it. An SOP would be step by step. How do I accomplish a specific task with an end goal? Similarly, a KB or a knowledge base is another one I get asked about a lot. I recently had a great example. I had to go document how the back end of our WordPress site works for transacting our sales. There was no particular problem we were trying to solve, but nobody knew how it worked, and we had built kind of a spaghetti monster behind the scenes. So I went through it to figure it out, and I did have something I wanted to fix, but I was just taking notes in the knowledge base. Oh, this connects to this. Oh, you change these types of things in this plugin. So that's the difference in the types of documents, and why I wanted to label them differently so I can also find them differently. One more tip in the how and the what. What this really brings to light is that an SOP, or even a technical SOP, is not a training document. You have to write them to the level you expect your people to be at. So if you're writing an internal technical SOP, we have to assume our technicians know certain things. Because if you have them reference an 8-page training document to remember the 8 steps they need to follow, they're not going to. It's too much information to sort through. So keep your SOPs short, and you can always expand upon it and link to training documents. All right, that was actually document number 1, and there's 4 core documents, so we're going to review 3 in this series. So that's the process, the blueprint to your documentation system. I found that there was 2 other little things we need to decide upon, and one is how to name devices. And it's because this document, I might even change it when they do just naming standards. It affects how you name certain SOPs. It affects how you name certain client assets, and it affects how you label a lot of things. So I consider this a core document, one of the magic four. I have a naming standard, and I have some details in the following slides, but essentially I end up combining a client naming convention, a device naming convention, a device numbering convention, and possible add-on for location. So here's my formula. All right, I like doing client initials. We have so many clients in the system. It's really a lot of typing because I'm constantly searching for data. So we came up with a system. You can certainly try your own. I think mine's pretty good. First name plus first three letters of the second name. It doesn't always work out. And when it doesn't, you write down the exceptions. Some people write them all down. Or even I had one client who named all of their clients in the documentation system with their initials first, dash the name. So there was always that association. Chatham area transit's a good one. I guess technically it should be CARE by our formula, but I had this as a client once and everybody called them cat. It was impossible to wipe out, and finally I caved. It's like, okay, we're going to make an exception. We're going to add them to the list. It's going to be official. And so now we have a single source of truth and everyone is crystal clear on what we're doing. Here's some more of that formula. Some device examples here. Look at the server naming at the bottom. There we have client server roles. And at the top, you have other non-server devices. I found that were special. I think I have a better example next. Yeah. And here are the naming conventions that I selected for what are those device and server function abbreviations. Again, you can pick your own, but I believe that done is better than perfect. So if you're struggling with this, copy and paste this from our template and be done with it. There's not a whole lot of reason to think more of it than that. I'm going to back up one more time so you can see how this compares to the naming. So let's pick on the McDonald's firewall in British Columbia where I happen to live. McDonald's has their client convention, dash is their first firewall. We said that initial is FW. We've decided that devices, not servers, have 3 digits. So I put all 3, 001. And then we included the optional location because guess what? McDonald's has more than one location. So I should differentiate. Yet when I was trying to document the switch for Eureka process at our main location, we just left that location abbreviation off of there.
So I was doing something right when I was running my MSP, and I did almost exactly that same thing.
Yeah, this is always hard to accept for me, but people ask what our unique differentiator is or what makes us so special. And I feel like in a wide sea of really high-tech stuff, we're the ones asking you to go back to basics.
Well, and the difference, by the way, is exactly what we talked about in the intro. The difference is I used these kinds of things, but I did not document it. And that's where the leaky bucket comes in. I didn't document it, so my people weren't doing it exactly the same way as I would have done it. And so we had variations that sometimes cause confusion.
Yes. Oddly enough, I took a disk profile assessment recently from a professional, and the results came back, and he did the consulting afterwards, and it's like, man, according to this, you are terrible at process. And he's right. The difference is I valued the results that process got me. So I feel internally rewarded by muscling through it and getting it done because I get what I need out of it. If any of you are not the owners or if you're service managers or technicians who are watching this video to try to manage up, I like to give them a black box. Think about training a rat. Yes, I'm comparing your manager to a rat. They crawl through the maze, and when they find the cheese, they're rewarded. Likewise, your service department or your tickets, they're a black box. You want to reward whoever puts the input in correctly with great results. Like, hey, if you put in the ticket right with all the info I need, you get no back talk and you get the ticket resolved right the first time. Conversely, if you don't do that, you find I'm asking a lot more questions. And so I do the same thing with process, right? If you follow the process, things just work. I hate having to build in consequences into processes that you might create. I want the natural consequence to what they're doing be better results. So
Yeah.
if they can't see it, we're going to have a tough time adopting it. And we're going to talk a lot more in part 2 about the culture of process.
Yeah, I've had the same experience. I'm really bad at time management. So what's happened is I've become really good at time management because I knew that I was really bad at it, and I had to build a process, for lack of a better word, or a framework that I know that I can work in for time management. So same idea.
Well said. Yeah, it's a, whenever you take a self-assessment test, there's also that prejudice that sometimes I will rank worse on a skill that I actually have because I'm so hyper aware of it. I'm critical. So I can go both ways. Last of the 3 documents for today, and it's a variation on a theme, password naming standards. Much like device naming, I will drive home a little more clearly that we need to count on global searches. All of my informal surveys have been that it's faster to search than it is to browse. So I am less concerned with folder structure and those types of ways to categorize everything as I am. Can I search for this quickly? So just like your devices are always written a certain way, that means you can always search a certain way. Same for passwords. Looking for passwords, make it easy to search, and consistency is key. I would go so far, and this is my Word document version of a longer document, to say, okay, people look for an Active Directory domain admin frequently. Go ahead and list that as a special thing. Always name it this. Domain admin or client initials - domain admin, depending on how your password manager works and how to find those. There's more examples on the screen, but this is more of decide, write it down, and then hold everybody accountable to what you have in writing. And I want to give you an example of what a good system looks like. It's mine. Again, we just happen to use IT Glue. There's many great systems out there. When I searched for ITG, I have client initial - long form of the name, parentheses, short form of the name. And also in our processes, you may put anything you like in parentheses to make it more searchable. So now I can quickly find every one of those. And if you'll note, there's even a typo in one of them. It's a little hard to spot, but it stands out a lot better because it's so consistent. I can see where my typos, and Eric is just like scouring. Where is it? Where is it? It's the second to bottom. There's a pipe sign in front of the parentheses, and there shouldn't be. It's my error. But when I did the screenshot, I caught it, and I had to go fix it. Usually my team catches it first. All right. For those of you counting at home, I said 3 key documents, and I forgot that I did include the 4th document, and we're going to go ahead and dive in because I think we have time today to do it. The last core document for building your blueprint is client asset documentation. And I think of this as a very different beast than all the other stuff that you do. It covers so many things, and it gets so much more technical than a series of steps. And the key takeaway here is, I'm not even going to cover all these bullet points with you, but you want to only document what is necessary and just enough that it is sufficient to get the job done when you're referencing documentation. So essentially what I'm saying in less words is, how little can I document? The less you ask for, the more you will get. It's almost like lowering your expectations to be happy, but you can't lower the bar more than what you absolutely have to have. So I like to use some of the questions I have on the screen here to guide me to, is this really necessary? I'll just use one bullet point as an example. Is it always? Don't build a structured field in data collection for something that happens 5% of the time. Save it for the notes field, right? And notes is another great tip. Have one. Give yourself free form to add anything that you can't figure out or know where to document at the time, have a place to put it. I actually have a document called Client Asset Documentation, and I write down what asset have I decided to document, what are the fields, and then I answer in the sub-bullet points every question I've ever been asked about that. Right? Hey, what did you mean by optional applications? I wrote down the answer to that question so the next person who comes, I can prevent them from asking it, and it's written here for you. I know this exact system is IT Glue. Hootoo's got very similar ways of tracking assets. Yes, rely on automation. If you have that, please don't reinvent the wheel. If you need to add to what the automation collects, I would create some sort of asset to track that, tag or link to what you already have, and just add the additional fields. If you already have a documentation mess, this is a great document because it tells you what's the old way, which we don't want to stop. Some documentation is better than none, but it tells you what's the new way that can help you prioritize your list and get all the way through it. So do I have time for one more tip?
Yes, you do.
Okay. Last pre-structured tip. Specifically for client assets, I like to create a documentation committee. On that committee, at almost every size of company, I like to have a high-tier tech, a low-tier tech, and the documentation czar. Their job is to prioritize your client assets, like, oh, let's do new user PC setup, or let's do firewalls first. Their job is to decide necessary and sufficient, what's the least we can get, and make this useful for us. And then once they've decided that, the higher tier tech goes out and documents one, comes back to the committee with findings, and they make adjustments if necessary. Then everybody on the committee documents one. They come back, report findings, and modify. Then they have everybody in the entire technical team in the company document one, report findings, and then it's the gospel and belongs in this document, is done and ready. In that course, you've just created probably 10 plus assets of this one type. Great proof of concept. Everybody's experienced it. Everybody's had feedback, so you know they're capable of getting all these done. So then the rule is, if you see it, fix it. If it doesn't exist, create it for this one type of asset. Now, as that progresses, those meetings for that one asset get shorter and shorter, right? That gives you time to cascade and go ahead and start the second asset. And over time, the third asset, because as you're going down the have everybody test it and report back, you have time to start discussing the second one and having the champion do that while the next week the champion's doing their thing and the committee's doing the one from the week before. So that's a great way to get your client assets documented. And you might find that committee has other uses too in assisting the documentations are for identifying and policing documentation. So that's what I had. And I'm looking forward to next week talking about how to build this into a culture of process.
Awesome. Well, as we're wrapping this up, Alan, why don't you go ahead and tell people like how they can get in touch with you, just in case for some reason they don't find the next episode of this. We want to make sure that people can go ahead and find you.
They would never. I find the easiest way is to look up our book, Process and the Other P Word. It is on Amazon and Audible. Ooh, look at that, twins. You can also answer in the comments who wore the jacket better. That's always a fun one. So far, I have never won that one. I'm looking forward to one day that happening. So yeah, or an Amazon search for Alan Edwards Process is the short form to find that. It has our contact info in it. Or, of course, as always, eurekaprocess.com.
Awesome. And we'll see them on the next episode of Office Hours.
Can't wait.